Today we're going to be talking about this morning we're going to be talking about inner healing, trauma and inner healing. And I just want to say this is a topic that in church sometimes just gets overlooked. You know, we cover up our pain. We cover up things that we've been through with a religious mindset that, oh, yeah, I know, I'm just standing strong. The Lord is with me. I'm going to make it through. And those are all good confessions. We need to be confessing that it is well with my soul. We have to be people of faith. We have to be people that when hard times come, when things happen in our lives, because, right, the rain falls on the good and the evil. But it's important that when hard times come, that we have the kind of faith that says, Lord, I know you're gonna take me through this. But how many of you know, just by experience, you know the Lord brought you through some really tough stuff? But that doesn't mean that you didn't feel the pain going through it. It doesn't mean that your heart didn't get a little bit beat up, bruised along the way. We all have a testimony here. We all have a testimony of what God has done and what God is doing. But it's important that as Christians, we also don't make the mistake in the efforts to sound like we're full of faith to ignore what's going on in our soul. This is a hard topic for some people because this challenges a lot of our upbringing. It challenges my upbringing at times because in my effort to want to have faith, sometimes I think that faith means that I'm acting like nothing ever happened. But real faith is being able to recognize that something happened and believe anyways. Did you catch what I just said there? Sometimes our version of trusting God through situations is being like an ostrich who sticks his head in the sand when something bad happens. When in reality, God doesn't want us to avoid situations. He wants us to walk through the fire and not be burned. He wants us to be able to stand in the flame and know that there's another one in the fire with us. Some of us, we've gone through things and we've experienced pain. And so I just want to preface before we go into this session, I want to ask you your permission to get a little bit personal. Do I have your permission? Because if I don't have your permission, it'll be very hard for you to hear anything that I share today. Because God is a gentleman. He never forces himself upon us. The enemy, on the other hand, he wants to come to steal, kill, and destroy. He does not care. He will try to break through everything that you have and steal everything he can from you. And if the door's locked, he tries to pry it open. But Jesus, on the other hand, he's a gentleman. He'll knock on the door, and he'll wait, and he'll wait, and he'll wait till you're ready. But just because he's waiting doesn't mean that God is not active or that God is indifferent towards your pain. Some of us have built up in our mind that God just wants me to toughen up. And don't get me wrong. As you have faith and as you learn to allow God to be your strength, you will become tough. Your spirit will become stronger. But you don't just become stronger by ignoring pain. You becomes stronger by dealing with it head on, by not avoiding it. And I'm not just talking about, oh, my friend, we're fighting right now, and it's, we're just having a minor argument. What I'm talking about is sometimes some of us have gone through things that are truly tragic, truly horrific, truly embarrassing for us to even admit. And if we ignore that in the church, you will walk around wondering why you can't get close to the Lord. You desire to get close to God, but you just have this glass ceiling in front of you. It's like he's so close, but you feel like there's this glass ceiling stopping you from getting any further. Sometimes when our soul experiences a breaking through traumatic events that have just happened to us or done to us by someone else, what happens is we think that if I just let time go by and I ignore it long enough, that things are going to just get better. We always say, hey, time heals all wounds. But that's not true. Time does not heal wounds. Only Jesus heals wounds. Only Jesus can heal the broken heart. In fact, that's what he said he came to do, right? Isaiah 61, he came to heal the brokenhearted, to bind up the wounds, right? Jesus is not someone who ignores pain. You heard yesterday the pain that Christ endured on the cross. Not only physically, but like we said, medical professionals believe that he died of a broken heart. Not only literally, but even metaphorically. It's symbolic of what Christ has done. The emotional stress, the emotional pain, Christ bared that on the cross for you and I, that we wouldn't have to carry it in this life. But some of us, we carry it thinking it's our badge of honor. That humbly I will allow myself to suffer and never grow in the Lord, because somehow the enemy has lied to us that that's your portion. I'm here today to tell you that it's not. We all have to take up our cross. This is true. But taking up your cross is far different than carrying emotional baggage that comes through sin, through a sinful world, whether it was done by you or done to you. And so today as we're talking, I just ask that your heart be open to hear, because Christ, he desires for you to be whole. And let me tell you this, it's just like a broken bone. You know how when you break a bone, if you don't get it dealt with properly in the time that it was broken. For example, I broke my foot. I broke a few toes in my foot. And with time, I kept walking on it. I learned how to endure the pain. At first, I couldn't walk. When it initially happened, I could barely stand on my foot. But with time, I learned how to just deal with it. It's like, okay, well, at some point it'll get better, you know? And so I kept walking on it. And finally I decided to go to the doctor. And when I went to the doctor, he says, oh yeah, you broke your foot pretty bad. And he's like, it's a shame that you didn't come in earlier, because your bones actually fused together incorrectly. Your body began to heal itself, but now your toe is stuck going this way. I've got a toe that looks a little funny. And because what had happened was I thought that time would fix my situation. But because I didn't deal with it properly, I didn't have it, at very least, have it set properly, it grew back, or it fused together weird. Some of us are walking around in the spirit with broken hearts, and time has gone by, and you no longer feel the initial emotional pain from it, so you think, oh, I'm better now. But you're walking around like this, spiritually speaking. You're walking bent over in the spirit. And you're wondering why in life now, time has gone by. It might have been 20 years ago when that pain happened, when that tragedy happened. But all of a sudden you find yourself, I can't seem to break through. I can't seem to move forward. Spiritually, I'm stuck. Or I keep finding myself going in revolving circles. Same patterns of life. I can't break out of this cycle. It seems like I keep being attracted to situations where people cause pain to me. And it seems like those same kind of pains keep happening over and over and over again. You see, when you heal incorrectly, you actually walk with a spiritual limp. And just because you're moving, it doesn't mean that you're healed. It doesn't mean that you are in the place that God has intended you to be. One of the solutions that the doctor offered to me was, well, you could keep going like this and just deal with this crooked toe the rest of your life. Or what we could do is, it's going to be kind of painful, but I could re-break your toe. and I can reset it, and then we'll just have to keep it wrapped next to the other toes to keep it straight. So that way it grows back, or that the bone refuses regularly. And I told the doctor, I'm like, yeah, I already broke it once, and that was pretty painful. Not really looking forward to breaking it again. I'll pass on that, doctor. I'll walk around with a weird-looking toe. And I feel like that's how some of us respond to the Lord. Jesus, he comes, and he knocks on your door of your heart. He says, hey, you know that pain that you've been carrying? I want to take it from you. And just the thought of Jesus even asking that of you, you're like, nope. It was way too painful the first time when it happened. I am not going to deal with that. I am not going to deal with that. And so we go, nope. Some of us have been saying nope for 30 years. And you're wondering why you feel stuck. You're wondering why I just can't move forward. Maybe for you something happened in a relationship and it just broke you. You got bent. And now you can't seem to hold a relationship, a healthy, godly relationship. Maybe it was a family member who said something or did something to you. And it has defined the way that you think in life. Words were spoken over you. You're an idiot. You're useless. And you're wondering why in life you have no desire, no vision, no purpose in your life. Because imagine this. Imagine if you've been told that you were useless all your life, and then all of a sudden now as you're trying to have purpose and meaning, trying to do something with your life, if you deeply in your heart of hearts believe that you're useless, imagine what that does to any future things that God has planned for you. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. Oh yeah, you're really great. You have such an awesome talent in this. But if on deep down on the inside you believe a lie about yourself, something that the Lord never intends you to believe, you will carry that into every decision that you make. It will follow you, whether you realize it or not. You may think, hey, I'm doing just fine. I'm managing. I'm doing good. But it doesn't take away the fact that you're walking around with a spiritual limp. You might be managing. Some people have managed really well. It's actually quite impressive how, to what extent sometimes we can function in our life with a broken spirit. And not the kind of broken spirit that the Bible talks about that the Lord likes. The Lord does say that he does not despise a broken spirit in Psalms 51:17. He says that. But that's a different kind of brokenness. That's a brokenness of the will. Some of us, we read that passage because I've heard many times before people who are making a case to keep carrying their pain. They say, well, doesn't the Lord love the sacrifice of a broken spirit? And my response to them is this: a broken spirit before the Lord is a broken will before the Lord. But what we're talking about is a broken soul. A heart that, because of the pain that's happened to it, actually self-sabotages. And you don't know why. You don't know why you do it, but you do. You don't know why it keeps happening, but it does. So for us taking notes, you can pull open your notes. Today I believe the Lord wants to do some healing in our soul. Are you ready for that? I know I am. The first point is defining trauma. Do we have the PowerPoint slide? The people can follow along. We'll wait for it to come up so that way you can follow along in your notes, because I want you to have this information when I leave. So we're on point 1. So the first thing is defining trauma. Trauma is a wound or a fracture of the inner person. Next slide. Trauma is a wound or a fracture of the inner person. So much like the example that I had shared about my toe breaking, it's much like that. It's a wound or a fracture, but not of a bone, of your soul. It results from an exposure to an incident or series of events that are emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So it's when you've gone through something that was extremely painful, and it can be socially painful, it can be emotionally, mentally, and physically painful. All of these things are defining of what trauma can look like in our lives. Trauma is a side effect of events that happens to us which are beyond our control. It could be anything from a road accident to falling down the stairs to sexual abuse or sudden bad news. These are all major event traumas. One single event that changed a lot. It can also be minor events or traumas, little traumas, that can cause similar experiences over time. So some of us were like, well, no, I've never had, something majorly happen. I haven't been sexually abused. I don't have those moments growing up that were, that I recognize that, yeah, maybe somebody who's been through some really bad trauma, they'll need this lesson. There's also trauma that can be developed like death by a million paper cuts. And that is these short-term little traumas, but they happen over and over and over again. For example, like I mentioned, let's just say your dad said you were useless, right? Maybe the first time he said it, it didn't mean anything. But that constant repeating of those words over your life, they can actually create trauma in your soul. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Things that build up over time. It builds a mindset in you. It does something to you. And let me also define it this way too. Trauma does not only have to be something severe. All of us experience pain in different ways. And actually, before I go into that, for the sake of having these down, you can write down acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. Acute trauma is result from a single incident. Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. And complex trauma is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often in invasive interpersonal nature. Are you guys following along right now? Am I going too fast or am I going at a good speed? So number 2, the consequences of trauma. Some incidents that do not cause any trauma for one person may be extremely traumatic for another. It's important to realize that trauma is a little bit subjective. Now, obviously, we would understand if someone was sexually abused, we would all expect that person to have some trauma, right? But there's sometimes cases where it's not so bad. Or at least from the outside, you're telling yourself, well, no, that doesn't hurt me. I'm not hurt by that. I got over that. It's not a big deal. There's people who've got it way worse than me. And you're telling yourself, oh yeah, it's really not that bad in my life. I know people who, at least I didn't go through what they went through, so I'm happy with where I'm at. But trauma doesn't have to be necessarily something super horrendous. It's just, how did it affect your emotion in the moment that you received it? For example, a teenager who's 6 foot tall can go down a water slide and splash into the water and just have the funnest time. Where maybe a 4-year-old goes down that same water slide, falls into the water, and they can't swim, and the water is much taller than they are. And their experience of that water slide is way different. Same experience, received it in a completely different way. It's possible for you to have experiences that other people went through and they did not have an emotional wound from. But for you, it did cause that. So I want to encourage us as we're talking today. If you're hearing a voice in your head saying, yeah, but mine's not that bad. I'm not saying to make a mountain out of a molehill. But if you recognize patterns in your life, as I'm talking, I'm believing that the Holy Spirit is revealing and highlighting to us areas in our lives where we recognize, you know what? what he's saying about these patterns and that glass ceiling, feeling like I can't move forward, that actually, I feel like he's speaking to me. I don't know exactly what I'm dealing with, but I resonate with the results of what he's talking about. I've actually found this to be true, and I'm not just saying this because of the environment that we're here in right now. Some of the people who have the most trauma are people who come from highly religious backgrounds. And I'm just going to leave that there for you. John told me when he came, he shared with me when he came here to internship that after the third week, I was the first person he hated. Because I began to share things that was breaking down a lot of things that he thought he believed. And so, unashamedly, I'm going to throw that out there, that some of the people that in my experience of ministering, okay, this is just my experience, some of the people who have some of the hardest trauma to deal with are those who have backgrounds that are highly religious and conservative. And let me tell you why. Because often in those circles, everything that is happening in your life, you automatically equate to God's judgment and punishment. And so you never allow yourself to even consider the thought that maybe the enemy was actually doing this. And even when you are now coming to a church like the Church of Acts, and you're here and you're like, no, I understand that the enemy is the one attacking, not God. You may have that now. It doesn't mean that your brain for the last 20 years of having this certain belief doesn't automatically go into the response of, well, things aren't working out in my life. I must have done something to really make God mad at me. I must deserve the pain that I'm in. And you carry it, like I said, like a badge of honor before the Lord, that, okay, well, Lord, if this is your measure for me, if this is what you want me to do, then I will carry my pain till the day that I die. And that can be so hard to break through because you have years and years and years of ideology that tells you that defends it. And it defends it not from just a humanistic point of view. It defends it from a spiritual point of view that you don't even want to question, because even the fear of questioning of it makes you feel like you are failing God. Am I speaking to anybody here? I say that, although I didn't come from maybe as a conservative background as some of you, I did have, growing up, certain beliefs. The enemy works on all levels, with all people. And that religious mindset can creep in on no matter what denomination you are. But I know for myself, I had a really hard time. I knew that God loved me. But can I tell you something? I didn't think he liked me. I knew that God loved me because, well, he's God. He has to love me. And, that's just what the Bible tells me, is that God loves me. God for so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So I believe he loves me, but I don't think that he likes me. I don't believe he likes me. I don't think he likes being around me. I think I'm a burden. I think that I'm wasting God's time. It's why some of us have a hard time pressing into worship. That's why some of us have a hard time connecting with the Lord, is because you believe that God doesn't like you. You have this ingrained belief that God doesn't even want to be around you, that you are a burden to him, and that, it'd be better off if you just stayed quiet. Show up, do what you got to do. You come here, I want you to do this, this, and this, but no more. And then get out of my presence, get out of my sight. I'm believing that God is going to begin to rework some of the ways that we think. But let me tell you, it's going to be painful. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. For some of us, it's going to be very painful. Just like having to re-break a bone in order to reset it. It's going to be a process that feels painful because it's like, oh man, I'm having to deal with all the things that I was trying to get away from. And now it's smack dab in the middle of my face. And it seems like God's not letting me let go of it. And what God is actually doing is he's actually wanting to show you where he was at during all of that. I want to share just something more personal as we're talking about this, because I want you to be able to realize that dealing with emotional pain and wounds, it should be something that we do constantly before the Lord. Even as mature believers, there doesn't come a point, sure, as you grow in the Lord, you become stronger, you might have less and less things that you have to bring to the Lord as far as emotional pain, because the Lord has really strengthened your spirit. But all of us are human. All of us have things that happen to us that are beyond our control. Just recently, as of 7 months ago, my father passed away tragically, just out of the blue. There was no reason. It just, all of a sudden, he was doing totally fine, and then I get a call from my mom. Actually, it was my brother-in-law who called me. Hey, you got to run to the hospital quick. Dad's heart stopped. And my dad, he had went in for a surgery. It wasn't a very invasive surgery. It was just, he lost a bunch of weight. And so it was a more cosmetic surgery to just get rid of some loose skin. Other than that, he was very healthy. They had just hours before done an EKG on his heart. There was no sign of distress in his heart. Everything was healthy. They checked all of his vitals. Everything was good. They're actually getting ready to release him to go home because, hey, you're fit as a fiddle. Everything checks out. You're good to go. And like I said, he didn't go to the hospital because he had underlying conditions. He went to the hospital just because he was getting a cosmetic surgery to get rid of some loose skin, so it was easier for him. And all of a sudden, I get this call. I'm like, whew. It hit me out of left field. Personally, I had never lost anybody that close to me. And what had happened was, in that moment, I get the call, and I was actually driving on the highway. I was at the exit where the hospital was at. So when I got the call that, hey, Dad's heart stopped, we're all going to the hospital right now, I showed up on the scene within minutes of that phone call, and I was there in the hospital room when the doctor was on top of him doing chest compressions and using the, what are those called, defibrillator, the shock, to try and bring him back to life. And there was 20 doctors in the room, and I show up on the scene, and it just felt so surreal. I felt numb. My body was like, what is happening right now? I just don't even know what's going on. My dad was healthy. It'd be one thing if I knew that let's say he had cancer or something like that, and I knew that he was on his way out. It literally came to our whole family as a complete surprise. And so here I am. I'm the first one there at the hospital room. It's just me and my dad. And my mom and my sisters had not come yet. And here I am. I'm standing there alone for 15 minutes. And my heart, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to feel. Now, for me, this was 7 months ago. And if I didn't know what I'm sharing with you today, I wouldn't be able to stand in front of you and be able to encourage healing in your own life. Things that, if I didn't know what I know about my spirit and how fragile it can be, and that I can bring my pain to the Lord, I would just wait for time to heal my wounds. And I would probably just not want to minister after that point. Because alone in that hospital room, I saw things that I never wanted to see my dad that way. And it happened so quickly. The first 2 months after he passed, no lie, I had the hardest time praying. Not because I was mad at God. I was not mad at God. I trusted the Lord. I was like the woman who said, "It is well with my soul." But every time I tried to pray for those first 2 months, I couldn't even pray and close my eyes without being back in that hospital room. Seeing my dad, his body being thrown around like a rag doll. And I don't mean to be so graphic here, but I'm sharing this because I want you to understand that we're all human. It's okay to not be okay. And I could not even pray. I was like, God, I don't even want to think about that right now. I'm wanting to pray. I'm wanting to be comforted right now, God. And this is not comforting. I could not pray for 2 months straight because every time I tried to pray, I would just see that image in my mind, and it was too fresh. It was too much. My emotions, my soul couldn't bear the weight of the pain. And so I was like, God, what is happening? I kept rebuking it as if it was demonic. And I felt the Lord say to me, "No, Bryson, I'm bringing it up. I want to deal with this. I want to deal with this because there is a wound in your heart that you couldn't control. It happened to you. And I don't want you to carry that pain. I hung on the cross so that you wouldn't have to carry that pain." And I finally said, "Okay, God, it's painful, but I teach other people this, so I'm gonna wait upon you, Lord. I know this is the right thing to do, as painful as it is to go through it myself." And I began to just wait there. And God brought back to my memory the moment of my trauma. Because the trauma hit me when I stepped into that hospital room. And I saw everybody standing around, and I could literally, even as I'm sitting in my room, I can still smell the smell of the defibrillator, of burned skin, and the ionization from the electrical pulse. I could still hear the the machine flatlining. And I could still see so vividly in my mind an image of my father, of his lifeless body that I just was not ready to see. And I share this now with emotion because it's still fresh, but I can tell you my heart has been healed in the process. Is that in that moment I was like, God, I don't want to deal with this. And I'm like, why are you bringing this up? So as he was bringing up the memory, and it's like I was reliving this memory all in front of me. And I was like, God, I don't want to dwell on the past. I want to look at the future. I want to move forward. And the Lord was saying, in order for you to move forward, you need to be able to properly define your past. And he revealed to me in that moment the core emotion of what I was feeling in that moment was that I was alone. For the 15 minutes, because let me tell you this, the 15 minutes that I was alone in that room by myself to have to process, I knew that my mom was about to walk in the door and that my sisters were about to walk in the door. And I knew that I had to be strong for them. And so in those 15 minutes, everything happened so quickly but so slow at the same time. And I pulled myself together. And when my mom walked in the room first, and hearing my mom hysterical is a sound I've never heard before. The wailing, the deep groaning of her soul. I've never heard my mom like that before. But I embraced her and I said, it's going to be okay. It's not okay, but it's going to be okay. And then one by one, my sisters came in. And I was there to meet them and comfort them. And I knew in that moment the Lord gave me strength in the moment to be able to comfort them in a real tangible way. But I didn't yet feel that comfort for myself. So I knew I was there first for a reason. I could reason in my mind why God had it be that way. I knew that it was something that God had intended, but it still didn't take away from the fact that my soul felt abandoned. Because one of the things that I didn't want to come to terms with was that even though I knew God made me available for my mom and my sisters, my soul was saying, where were you, God? Where were you for me? Because in that moment, I felt abandoned. Now, my teaching in my mind knew to say, God is always with me. I knew the truth, and I stood upon the truth. I didn't stand on my feelings, but it didn't take away from the fact that my feelings still felt. And I was trying to fight through that. And the Lord is a personal God. God is a personal God. He cares about what's going on in your heart. It's good for us to have our statements of faith that we stand and we believe upon. But just because we have that doesn't mean that God doesn't want to help us also work through the pain and bring healing in the pain. And so here I am in my room, and I have this encounter with the Lord. And without going into this really long story, there was actually some supernatural things that happened prior to my dad's passing. 3 weeks before, the Lord gave me a vision, and I won't go into details, but he gave me a vision of heaven that I didn't understand at the time. And there were certain things that were said in that dream that didn't make sense. And in that moment, he brought up to memory the vision that I had 3 weeks before my dad's passing. And long story short, he tells me, Bryson, I showed you what I showed you then because I knew that right now in this moment, you would feel abandoned. And the things that were said in that dream and what took place in that dream was actually a foreshadow of what was happening in the hospital room. Again, I know that's not, I'm being vague there, but that's for the sake of being able to move forward, because I could talk about that whole experience for another hour. But the long story short is that when I finally allowed God, I allowed myself to be vulnerable with God, to say, God, I am hurting, and God, I am confused, and God, I feel like, I know you didn't abandon me, but I kind of feel like I was left alone. In the flood of a moment, just he made it so clear to me, Bryson, you were never alone. In fact, let me show you exactly why you were not alone. And he brought up moments from that dream. He placed that dream in my life for the moment of when I was going to need it then and there. He said, I allowed you to see that before it even happened. And that allowed my heart to heal. My emotions finally aligned with what I believed, which is, I'm not alone. I'm not abandoned. Jesus never leaves me or forsakes me. And I'm able to stand here and continue in the faith, and I can say, God is with me, and I can believe it. There's substance behind the words that I say. Not because I'm just tough. I'm not tough. I'm just a man. I have flaws. We all have flaws. We all have humanity. But when you know how to allow the Lord, and you can allow the Lord to heal your heart, then the statements of faith that you say, you not only say them, you believe them. And there's substance. Faith is the substance of things unseen, right? There is the faith that you kind of that you have is not just a faith of like, well, this is what I'm hoping is true, so I'm going to say it because I hope it's true. And then there's the faith that comes that says, I know this is true. And I believe it. I'm standing upon it. And I'm saying it not silently hurting. Truly healing in my heart. Whole in my heart. Some of us, we have had traumas in our life. Experiences. And just because we come from Christian backgrounds doesn't mean that any of us are even necessarily the exception for sexual abuse. Some of us had things that happened to us as a child. Some of us had things happen to us that a man of God should have not done. And I'm just being very honest. Some of us had spiritual abuse, maybe not sexual abuse, but spiritual abuse. Things that were said to you by an authority in your life, that their words had more meaning and had more power over your life than you care to admit. And it is following you into your future, even as much as you keep trying to push it away. Most of the traumas that happen to us actually happen to us in our childhood. It's in the formative years. Did you know in the first 5 years of your life, psychologists have actually done a study on this. The first 5 years of your life are the most formative, that your brain actually, this is the stage when your core beliefs about who you are actually made concrete in your mind. Like your deep part of your mind, it's in the first 5 years of life that those things are actually concreted. They actually have used brain scans on people as they're seeing. They can actually visibly see how the brain changes from year to year, and how even the brain shape has changed according to that. It's actually something that is not only just a spiritual thing, it actually has physical implications as well. And so your view of life oftentimes is developed in the first 5 years. Neuroscientists have come to understand there's a part of your brain called the reticular formation. I'm going to get a little bit scientific here for a moment, if that's okay. There's a thing called the reticular formation in the back of your mind. And scientists understand this to be the place in your mind where your most instinctual responses are held, and your most instinctual emotions are held. They recognize that there's actually a place in the back of the brain where visions, memories are stored. And they're stored in such a way that it's why when you go to I know for myself, the first time I flew into Amsterdam, I can still smell the air of pastries and flowers. Do you have those memories where oh man, it's so real I can almost smell it, right? You have those memories, right? You have those things like, oh man, that was so good, I can almost taste it now. Why is that? Your brain actually has this thing called the reticular formation where it actually can store memories and emotions so much to the level that you can almost relive the experience. And the more impressionable those memories are, the more that you can relive them. That is why trauma has such a intense effect on you, is that your brain goes through such a traumatic experience, like you experience something, and boom, it's stuck in your memory. And it's so stuck in your memory that someone can just say a word. They can look at you wrong. They can say something funny. And all of a sudden, it's like you're reliving this experience. It's like, I don't know why I acted that way. I don't know why I responded that way. It's just like, when you said that thing, it triggered me. And it just got me riled up. Some of us are wanting to be delivered from a spirit of anger, and you actually don't realize that it might actually not be a spirit of anger, but actually a wound in your heart. That's kind of hard to deal with because it's a lot. Let me tell you this. As someone who does deliverance, okay, you guys know, the church that we come from, we believe in deliverance. We practice it. But not everything is a demonic spirit. Now, let me tell you this. If you have a wound in your heart, it can make way for a demonic spirit. Think of it like this. A wound neglected is a wound infected. Oftentimes what happens to us in life is we get a collection of these wounds in our heart. They're open, and we never deal with them. And you know when you don't take care of a cut, if you don't put a Band-Aid, you don't put antiseptic on it, what will happen is that bacteria will get into it, it will get infected, and it will make a bad thing worse. That is what happens in our soul. We get hurt in our soul, we get these wounds, and then demonic spirits will see an opportunity say, oh, I'm going to make a bad thing worse. They'll come in, and the demonic spirit, the demonic stronghold is like a demonic infection. And it just tries to take that bad situation and just accelerate the process. So some of us, and sometimes when an infection gets really bad, before you bind up a wound, right, in natural senses, you go to the doctor. If you have a really infected wound, what do they do first? They deal with the infection. They give you a medication, right? Or they give you a topical ointment to put on it to deal with the infection first, because you can't bind up a wound that's infected. If you do, you got more serious problems ahead of you. So it's important that you receive deliverance, because deliverance is getting rid of the infection. But some of us, we think, oh, I've been delivered. Okay, now everything is good. You're on the path, but there's still a little bit more. Just because you've been delivered, it doesn't mean that you have been fully healed. And so that's why some of us, even after receiving deliverance, we're like, okay, yeah, no, I know. It's actually, I've experienced a new level of freedom than I have before. But if I'm being honest, there's still a little bit of something going on, and I'm not quite sure. There's a very good chance that you actually have a soul wound that just needs to be bound up. And Jesus wants to come and bind up your broken heart. He wants to come in and help you understand what you went through, and he wants to show you where he was at in the situation, and he wants to close that chapter of your life. But that's the hardest part, because that's the part that hurts the most. Deliverance is easy, because when you realize that, okay, it's not just me, there's something else going on. Someone pray for me. Deliverance can happen just like this. Someone prays for you, and then the demon comes out, you're good. Healing, on the other hand, that one's a little bit harder. That one involves a little bit more of your willingness to allow it. One of the things that I like to share with people is this. It's like a puppy. Have you ever had a puppy that hurt its foot, right? And you try to go help that puppy. Oh man, that foot's bleeding. My dog one time, she hurt her foot. She stepped on this really big thorn, and it just went straight through her foot, all the way through. And I had to pull it out, and I was going to help her out. But for her, in her mind, all she thought was, stay away. This hurts. Don't come near it. You're a threat to me right now. Even though I'm not a threat to my dog perceived me as a threat simply because it was hurting. It was limping. And it did not want me to come near that point of pain. What the dog didn't realize is that I was actually coming to help heal it, help make it better. And some of us here, we've got pain that we've been carrying, and Jesus wants to come and heal you, and you're saying, God, heal me, help me, deliver me, whatever I need, just help me. But then the moment Jesus gets close, you go, nope, get away, get away, get away. You go like this, God, I need you near, but you put a stiff arm. And God can only get this close. Not that God can't overpower you, it's just that God won't overpower you. He won't do anything that you won't allow him to. Because everything, God gave us a free will. You are allowed to carry whatever you want to carry, which is a beautiful thing and a really hard thing, because it puts a lot of responsibility as us as believers to deal with it. Not that we have to be the one to heal ourselves, but we do have to play our part in allowing God in. Do you follow me? I want us to do an activity. Is this speaking to anybody today? Are you ready to allow Christ to heal you? I want to set your expectation right. I don't want you to just expect someone to come lay hands on you and, pray over you, and you just have this crazy experience, and then you go home and you don't deal with it. I want you to prepare your heart. Now, some of you, because of the pain that you've been carrying, deep emotional responses are going to happen. It's going to actually sometimes look like deliverance. Some of you today, as we actually get into ministry time, very well could get delivered in the process. And we're open to that. We're ready for that. But today, the objective is not necessarily just deliverance. Today, it's also about learning to allow God in. Because honestly, once you learn this concept, you can learn how to let God heal your heart all the time. Case in point, like I just said, for myself, I didn't need anybody to lead me through this prayer. I didn't need anybody to go through that with me. I knew how to come before the Lord and bare my heart before Him and be honest with God about how I was feeling, about what I was going through, and God was faithful to lead me through that. Okay? Now, the reason why I bring up the reticular formation is because I don't want anybody to have this. Sometimes when the topic of inner healing comes up, people feel a little ooky spooky about the concept. It can feel like, oh man, what are they doing? It's like, what's happening here? I get deliverance because deliverance is demonic, but like this, leading someone through inner healing, that can be a little bit scary, feel a little ooky spooky kind of thing. I want to demystify it for you. Understand this. Your soul has wounds. And when it has wounds, because what is your soul? Can anybody tell me what the soul is? What is the soul comprised of? The mind, the will, and the emotions. See, your spirit, soul, and body, would you all agree? Spirit, you're a spirit, your soul, and you're a body. You're 3 in 1, just the way that God made you, because He's 3 in 1. So He made you in His image, in His likeness. Your spirit, at the day of salvation, was made perfect, right? You accepted Christ into your heart, and your spirit was made alive. It was made alive in Christ, okay? But your soul is going through a process of sanctification, and that happens in 2 ways: renewing of the mind and healing of the soul. Now, the renewing of the mind, that's the part that we really work on a lot, right? That's the easiest thing to work on. And that's I don't feel it, but I'm going to stand on and believe it. It's not easy, but that one's a little bit more tangible to work with. The healing of the soul is kind of harder because it's hard to deal with things that you're like, man, but I feel it. I feel it, and I don't know at what point am I supposed to ignore it and at what point I'm supposed to deal with it, And I would just say this. If it is consuming your life, if you're seeing that your life is going in patterns, then it's probably something a little bit deeper that you should probably allow the Lord to deal with. If it's something like, no, I'm standing in faith, I know what the Word of God says, and I'm renewing my mind according to His truths, and you're doing just fine with that. Of course, you have seasons, okay, I got to stand strong. But if there are memories that are constantly replaying in your mind, things that come in your life that all of a sudden, like you had good character, but in that moment, something was just said and it triggered you, and you just totally acted not like yourself. In fact, you acted like your old self. And it's like, whoa, I hadn't seen that guy in a long time. I thought that guy was dealt with, right? Didn't expect that to come up out of me. I didn't expect that level of anger to just rise up out of me. I haven't really dealt with that, but all of a sudden it's just coming out of me. You said that word and it just, Then you very well could need some inner healing. And that simply looks like you taking time before the Lord and saying, Lord, I surrender my emotions to you. Sometimes it's as simple as that, depending on the level of pain. Because here's the thing. Like I said, we all experience trauma differently. And sometimes things can have more of a profound effect on us than we realize. If it's a small wound, right, you don't have to do much. But depending on how deep the wound goes, depends on whether or not it's full open heart surgery, right? And how you have to go about it is you need Jesus, the ultimate physician, to come in and do some real soul work here. And so, for some of us, that could be as simple as saying, God, I give that to you. And you may not feel anything majorly emotional, and that's totally fine. But others of us, because the trauma that happened to us was really painful. It really hurt. And the memories are fresh, as if it happened yesterday, even though it was 20 years ago. Those of us, you're going to have to stay a while. And you're going to have to work through it. And you're going to have to allow Jesus into some places, because what happens is we build up these walls. You know, have you ever met someone who's just they're so hurt, they've got walls around them? They're like a turtle with a hard outer shell. It's been the way that they keep themselves safe. Well, I'm not going to let you hurt me. I'm not going to let anybody hurt me. I had to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. Nobody's ever going to do that. I'm not going to ever be embarrassed like that again. And so you respond a certain way. Some of us have these walls that really are getting in the way. So you're going to have to deal with those walls. And sometimes those walls are hard to deal with on your own, which is why we're going to have ministers today help lead you through prayers. Because sometimes you need someone to partner with you. You need another believer to stand with you in faith and help lead you through prayers of forgiveness, of renouncing, of releasing, and allowing the Lord to bring healing. And so, I just want to set the precedence for us that it's going to look different for several people. And don't look around at somebody else and say, oh, man, like, they're not going through it the way that I'm going through it right now. It looks like they're totally fine, but I'm about to lose it. Don't even care about that. Who cares? Who cares if you're the only one in the room that's about to lose it? Do you want to be healed? Or do you care about what other people think? I don't know about you, I just want to be healed. And I share my story with you, my recent story, that you don't feel intimidated or that you're less of a Christian just because you need some healing in your heart, okay? We always will have to go through this. When we experience hard things, we always have to bring it before the Lord. And then others of us, on the flip side, if you see somebody else really receiving, and you're like, I'm trying, but it's not getting there, don't be discouraged, okay? It's not about how it happens. It's just important that you are taking active steps to allow the Lord to heal you. So don't be embarrassed if something crazy happens. Don't be discouraged if nothing crazy happens. Okay? What we're going to do right now, and we'll probably have some background music because we're not going to do ministry just yet. We have one more session, and I'm going to talk about overcoming rejection.